if you can't. You cannot hear me?
I know, that's an oxymoron, right?
Yeah.
Is that what they call that? I don't know what the word is. Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, Rabbi.
It might be another
Get
word.
very
but-
rabbinical.
Yeah, it's like Mr. Rogers.
Once you put the cap on.
Yeah.
You ready?
Thank you.
Yeah.
The official pose.
Thank you, Melaine.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Kathleen Archambeau. Can everyone hear me? If you can, raise your hand. Good, great.
Nice.
And I'm the author of this book that just came out in December, the Book of Awesome Queer Heroes. And our own fabulous rabbi, Camille, I call her Camille Angel, but she corrected me, it's on hell. But I like Angel because she is a bit of an angel. And she was in the book, along with some people in the audience that I'd like to introduce you to. Dr. Cecilia Wambach, would you mind standing? And Cecilia is in the book. She started an international education program for refugees in Syria that's still going on. And Jim Wood, would you mind standing? Jim is a lawyer who's done at least 20 years of pro bono work for AIDS patients and helping them with respect to employment discrimination and health care discrimination. He's been a tireless advocate and rode for years in the AIDS life cycle to LA. So thank you, Jim. Susie Hoskins, would you mind standing?
No, I wouldn't mind, although I haven't done anything for anybody.
Susie is very modest, but she's a gold medal winner in the Gay Games for ballroom dancing, and she has organized ballroom dancing for the queer community in the San Francisco Bay Area for decades. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Now I'd like to introduce Donal Godfrey. How many of you know Donal as the university chaplain? One person? Amazing. I just met him and I feel like I've known him for a lifetime. Donal is an Irish priest as he is defined, though he was born in England. He's a member of the Irish Bar. I want to hear more about that. And he wrote a fabulous book called Gays and Grays about Most Holy Redeemer Church in the Castro. And this church was transformed from a working class Irish Catholic church to an integrated LGBTQ Irish Catholic church. And the way it happened was through the crisis of AIDS. And I'll let him tell you all about it. And on my right is Rabbi Camille Shira on hell.
Angel. It was on Gelchik originally.
Okay, Angel, good, Angel. So I was right the first time. In any event, Rabbi Angel is a 9th generation rabbi, which is pretty remarkable. And she is the first at USF to be a Rabbi-in-Residence at this Jesuit Catholic university, which is a feat in and of itself. She's been awarded a Doctor of Divinity from the Hebrew Union College. She went to Hebrew Reform Rabbinical School in New York and started her career there. But really what I found fascinating is she was a rabbi in a gay district synagogue for 15 years. So I want to hear more about that. And coming to USF, she is the first person to use queer in the title of a class, which is pretty radical. So, having introduced them, I want to ask them both very similar questions. So, who are your queer heroes and why? Anybody?
I have many of them are in this book, but many people in this book I didn't know about. Thank you for writing the book. Congratulations, and congratulations to you, Camille, and to those who are in the book. Thank you for being there. I learned about you also in this book. But I have a couple of people. Cathal Kerrigan in Ireland. I went to university in Cork, in Ireland, and this is 44 years ago, and there was an openly gay man who was head of the Students' Union. I wasn't openly gay. I didn't know my own orientation at the time, but I did know I had friends. And Carl was one who was openly gay, and my friend, and he was the head of the Student Union. So that was long before Berkeley had an openly LGBT-identified student leader. In Cork, Ireland, it was, the reputation at the time was that we were behind the times and all of that. But there were things happening, and it was very interesting. The other person is a Catholic transgender woman, Hilary House, who I invited to speak here one time, and she also is one of my heroes. And just throw in, for good measure, two people who work here. Derek Lehner, who's the director of the Fromm Center in this building, and Simon Flores, who works with our students in CASA program. And they met here when I was here 36 years ago. They met in Gilson Hall, and they've been partners ever since, and I've been their friend ever since. So they're back here working again, and I had dinner with them last night, and they were telling me and reminding me of things I'd forgotten about the group that was on campus at the time. There was one, I think it was called, I forget what it was called, but it was the only LGBT group on campus, and it was only for students. Faculty and staff were not doing anything at the time. And they were reminding me that I would join them regularly for picnics in the Golden Gate Park and all kinds of fun events, some of which I remembered, but not all of them. So,
Thank you. Yeah. And Rabbi Camille?
Well, I am always acquiring new heroes. So as of late, Bishop Buddy, my buddy, Bishop, she's a hero now of mine that I hadn't known until now. Although one of my students actually heard her speak at an Episcopalian conference and was inspired by her prior to her national acclaim. And another hero of mine has become Father Donal Godfrey, because from the time that I started teaching here, I came along thinking, oh, I'm doing something new, and in fact, you've been doing this quietly and publicly and over decades, and I have been honored to bring you into my course every semester that I've taught here since 2017 to challenge students to think beyond what they assume is possible in the manifestation of you. And I'll just add that, Kathleen, you've been an elder, teaching elder in my Honoring Our Queer Elders class, and I've seen the impact that you've had on 2 different semesters of students, and you are a lifeline to those students and a hero in your own right. So, I don't know, do you get pages in there?
It's enough to be the author. Thank you, though. Thank you. Was it hard, I'm going to go back to Rabbi, was it hard for you to be out in your religious community of Reform Judaism?
I am fortunate that when yes, I guess the short answer is yes. It was hard for me to be out originally. When I applied to become a rabbi, it was still the case that they were trying to weed out homosexuals from seminary. So when I was ordained in 1995, I was part of the first class of students who could be openly gay and attend. So we could admit in advance and still plan on being ordained. Whether we would get a placement was yet to be determined. So I was sort of in that first generation of out queer rabbis to get placements. And being the first in anything, find challenges. And yeah, you only gave me 2 minutes, so I won't go into many of them. But I will say that coming here, after having served the LGBTQ flagship congregation, Sha'ar Zahav, coming here, I have had a warm welcome, and my ministry, my Queering Religion ministry, has been uplifted and supported, and that's just been a tremendous statement in terms of being able to be out in religious communities. I like to say things may be looking really poor out there, and in fact, there's never been a better time in history for a lesbian rabbi to teach at a Catholic university queering religion. So both are true.
Well said. And Father Donal, the same question.
One word answer, yes. I mean, it's a long story and I've got a minute, but I mean, there's a reason I'm in San Francisco is partly because I wanted to be somewhere where I could be authentically myself in this way, open and honest. Things have changed in the world and things have continued to change in the church, but it's been a struggle, and often, yeah, sometimes sometimes the pain is of people who've gone after me at different times. I'm not going to go into the details, but sometimes it's from people who just, it's not an issue so much of, sometimes, straight people have been my friend and supported me, and people who are part of the LGBT community have gone after me because of their own shame and their own confusion, I suppose.
Or anger at the church.
Or, yeah. Well, that too, but usually it's some people who are not out, So.
Who use their internalized homophobia as weapons against
Sometimes.
others.
And they may not even know they're doing it, but they are. Maybe
But we know who they are.
Consciously or unconsciously. Yeah. Yes.
We keep a list.
I hope it's unconscious. But it's not attractive whether it's conscious or unconscious. Yeah.
Yeah. So why do you think, Rabbi, it's important to be out as a religious leader?
Well, I brought 20 books to quote from.
And she has 1 minute.
I think it's important to be out because I draw my own power from a place of authenticity, and I feel joyful that my sexuality is part of who I am, and my gender expression is part of the unique person that I am. And I don't want in any way to have to manage who I am in order to lead. So any community in which I would have to compromise some core parts of my identity in order to show up and demonstrate faith, I personally, it would be irreconcilable for me. And also, the other thing I want to say is that part of my strength of being a leader comes from being a lesbian who's been marginalized and has suffered homophobia. Because as a white, privileged Jew, I couldn't really wrap my mind around the narrative of the Exodus in the same way that I can when I sink down into my otherness as a queer person. So when I realized that early on, I felt like, oh, this is actually a place where I can draw strength, and the words of my tradition speak to me rather than not for me or through me in a meaningful way.
And Father Donal, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Well, I think it's important because I am able to be open and honest, but there are many people within my church and elsewhere in other faith traditions who are not able to be, and I never judge them, and they're in circumstances where that may not be possible or even safe. So I think it is important for those of us who can be open and honest, because this is what part of who God is. I'm using language of the Holy Spirit, but the Spirit, whatever you call that, Spirit, maybe we have different words for that, but I use the language of Holy Spirit. I believe the Holy Spirit is is actually asking this of some people.
Well, those are kind of my softball questions.
I know, I looked at the other one.
Now I'm going to ask a little bit of the harder question. You're a gay Catholic Jesuit priest. How is it possible, when the Catholic Church has preached against homosexuality for centuries, and even now holds to the idea that homosexual versus heterosexual sex is wrong?
I think the first thing is that the Catholic Church is not a monolith that many people believe it to be. Within history, there's been many different threads. There's a book written by a historian who was Catholic on the early Christian church, and it was they didn't understand sexuality or sexual identity and gender identity in the ways that we do, but nonetheless his argument was that there was a different openness at that time. And throughout history there's always examples that subvert the paradigm that we all know, and that is true, but it's not the only part of the truth. I'm learning more and more about saints who were non-binary. I'm learning more and more about a shrine in Italy of Our Lady where trans and other queer folk go every year, because in the Middle Ages she defended a gay couple who were going to be stoned to death in the village. And it's a legend, of course, it's a story, it's a myth, but the story is that she defended them and they lived happily ever afterwards together in that village because she defended them. And ever since, queer folk, whatever you want to call that, go to thank her. So, and the other thing is, the church, it's complicated, it's a big question that would take probably a course to unpack. Clearly my understanding is there is a need to evolve. We're not the only church or faith tradition that has been trans and homophobic. Most have until recently in some way, shape or form. And the evolution of the Catholic Church is complicated because we're enormous and because we're so old and because of the structures of it. So it's a very complicated process to change any teaching. It evolves very slowly, way too slowly for most of us. The other thing is the role of conscience. The church, there's a space because the church teaches the primacy of conscience. So, I have the right and prerogative as a Catholic to disagree with some teachings of the church in conscience. So individuals have the space to do that. It's not even promoted by many people within the church, but it is part of our tradition.
That's a good out.
I'm not defending what we've done I'm very grateful. Recently, Cardinal Wilton Gregory, who's the first African-American cardinal in U.S. history, appointed by Pope Francis, made a profound apology last week to LGBT folk in Washington, D.C., where he is the Archbishop. And we've a long way to go, but I think we've begun the journey.
And as far as you go, I have to ask you, you're a queer Jewish Reform rabbi at a Jesuit Catholic institution. How do you reconcile those paradoxes? And why were you drawn to this work?
Well, I'm using all my time thinking how to answer that. I'll just say how I got here, basically. I was a cameo guest in Professor Aaron Hontapper's class on Jews, social justice, and activism. And I started coming to his class as the local professional lesbian Jewish activist in 2007. And then in 2015, I called him up and said, could I actually teach a full course for you, not just be a one-off? And he said, I think I could help make that possible. So he said, if you could figure out a way to use the word queer in the title of your course, Prior, I had been the rabbi at the LGBTQ congregation here in San Francisco. So I said to him, actually, queer isn't really a descriptor for me. I describe myself as a lesbian. And he said, whatever, if you can get behind that word, queer, it'll be the first course in the catalog that is in the title, queer. So I thought about it, and I came back and I said, how about queering religion? And as my students know, because they just read this essay on what is queering, it's a verb, in this case, that challenges and questions dogma and messes up assumptions and misconceptions. So the opportunity to work and teach and be amongst non-Jews, that was the first time in my career. My whole life growing up, my work was in service of Jews in the Jewish community. When I came to teach here, I think part of what I discovered was I started to learn more about Christianity and specifically about Ignatian spirituality and values. And I came to appreciate through Donal and through Angelica, the director of chaplaincy, and my friend Julie Dowd and others, how much we share in common and how much we misunderstand each other and how both are true. And so I felt like as I began my first semester of teaching queering religion in 2017, I discovered that there was a body of work to be done that was beyond the class, that the number of students taking my classes reporting church hurt from religious teachers and parents and leaders and youth group, church hurt around being queer, or having someone in their family who was queer. The number of students whose stories were about discovering hypocrisy and then rejecting religion altogether seemed to me like I could insinuate myself and offer something altogether different. And so while I might have originally thought my job was going to be to minister to Jewish students on campus, actually, that's a small part of what I do, because we like to brag that about 30%, somewhere between 25 and 30% of USF identifies as queer. That's a much bigger ministry, a congregation to engage with than the number of students who are prioritizing their Jewish identity. And so anyway, it was suggested that the class create a co-curricular program. And I love the fact that they're on payroll, like there's a budget for queering religion. And when I tell my students, everything they write is going into the archives. When 100 years from now, people want to know, what did they do? What did they learn in queering religion? It will be your essays and responses and reflections and thank you notes. That's what they'll learn about what we did. And I feel like we're saving lives, frankly. Like, just to add one last 30 seconds. Tuesday, my students did a dedication of learning ritual, and we created a sacred space in our classroom where we all went around and said who we would hope our commitments to our education in this class, the energy might go to benefit, alive and dead. Like, our learning has an impact, and we all will have an impact on the spheres of influence in our own lives, and we are relying on you to take these messages and be out there in the world disseminating this new good word.
And you once said that being a rabbi was kind of like the family business. What did you mean by that?
Well, the definitive circumstance in my life that defined my vocation was my relationship with my father. He was an 8th generation family rabbi. His father was an Orthodox rabbi who came from Poland at the turn of the century, and my father was so precious to me, but he died before I was much of an adult. He died when I was 12. And so it became evident to me fairly early on that the way that I could cultivate a meaningful relationship with him past his lifetime was to study what he had studied, and therefore I would be able to better understand his sermons and his blessings and his benedictions and his war diary during World War II as a military chaplain, that I would have more of a background to be able to engage with him. Whether I would go on to serve as a rabbi, I wasn't sure about, but I knew that I wanted to follow in his footsteps, and so it's a weird thing to like, what do you do? They told us we should get married before we were ordained because nobody wants to date a rabbi, right? Because of all the assumptions people make about a spiritual leader. So you want to get married, you better do it before you're ordained. So the way I could explain it easiest is like, it wasn't that unusual for me. It was like the family business. It was like, my father was a rabbi. My godfather taught at the university, the Claremont Colleges and the School of Divinity. He was a rabbi. My sister married a rabbi when I was 3 years old. It was like the family business, like I say. So, yeah.
You came by it honestly.
I do.
And Father, how has your being out helped Catholics and other students at USF, in your opinion?
It's a good question. I don't think about that question all that often, but I'm glad you raised it. I hope it allows, students are on their own path, their own spiritual path. And I'm in the Office of University Ministry with Camille, and our job is to respect and accompany them and honor them, whatever path they're on, and support them in that. But it does, I hope, open up possibilities for students. And I think when I sometimes come to your class, that they write to me, and it's very touching what the students write to me, it's very touching. And I get things like, I was brought up Catholic and I'm lesbian, I had no idea I could be the possibility of being both. They're not answering the question for them, but at least it opens up the possibility. Because what hurts me is when there is, we're not in the business of trying to make, we're a Catholic Jesuit institution, but we're a university where we respect and honor everybody as they are in their own journey, and we honor that totally. But at the same time, I hope it's a space where people can explore possibilities, and it hurts me when people think that the faith institutions which often we have slammed the door on people. It's often an individual or some particular community that's hurt somebody and that people are traumatized. But I hope that here people can see it doesn't have to be that way. And especially, more important than the institutions is that people's relationship with God, the divine, the sacred, is damaged by the acts of churches and faith communities. And that really angers me, because that damages somebody in a deep part of their soul where they have to recover that in some way. So whether or not they remain in an institution or not is not really the point. It's that damage that's been done to sacred part of an individual that is so wrong and so damaging. And I hope I can be a person who is somewhat of a healer on campus. Yeah.
And I see your T-shirt says, your sweatshirt says,
well,
I support undocumented students.
Well,
Tell me about that.
Well, our office, 7 years ago, we started selling these when there was the mass deportations then, although nothing on the scale of what we're experiencing right now. Because we have undocumented students, and we have them in our office too, working with us alongside us. So we didn't know what to do, but one of the things was we sold these and we raised money to help our undocumented students. So we're back in the last few weeks, as you can imagine, we're back selling them again, and we're stepping up our response to what's happening in the country right now.
I want to buy one.
There's a link, and I can share it with you.
Yes.
The other thing is, I think it's very important. The point is, I think we have there's a saying, I don't know if it's an Irish saying or not, you're up the ladder, pull up the ladder. So you kind of you've made it, so now you pull up the ladder so nobody else can come up the ladder. But in fact, I think we need to be conscious of the need to come together across our differences. The LGBTQ folk, and especially trans folk who are under attack in this week, and it will be in the next year from our federal government, we need to understand that we need to step up in solidarity with others, such as undocumented immigrants and others, and all the other people who are being...
All the others.
Yes, all the others.
Being othered.
Being othered, and when there's no others. I mean, my faith, the strong belief in my faith, and I see it in the person of Jesus, that he didn't have... there wasn't the other, and of course he got into big trouble for it. As Bishop Budi has asked for mercy, which is just something that's in the gospel. Blessed are the merciful, blessed are the peacemakers. Just to ask for what's in the gospel is now a threatening act to, and she has received death threats and other attacks of the most vicious kind from people who call themselves Christian, but maybe Christian nationalists rather than Christian.
Well, they haven't read
They
the
haven't read the
same
Gospels.
Bible
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I've read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I jump
Yeah.
on and ask him one question that I
Sure.
usually put you on the spot for in front of my students,
What's it
and that
coming
is,
now?
well, I have students who are Catholic in my
Yeah.
class this semester, and I want you to tell them if they one day fall in love and want to have a Catholic service that sanctifies their marriage, can you tell them that that's possible?
Catholics who are in this situation are finding ways that is within their tradition to honor and celebrate with ritual. It's not officially recognized, but it's happening, and in various ways, and I've witnessed that myself, and be part of that.
Well, and as an Irish Catholic who grew up in San Francisco, I was getting married in 2008 in that little window before
Oh, yeah. I
California
was going to weddings every week at that time.
denied marriage. We got married at San Francisco City Hall, and we had a witness, and Cecilia, you were there at the after party. We had a witness who was an Irish Catholic priest, and he said, I want to be a witness, but I can only do it as a private citizen, not as a priest. We would have had him perform the ritual because we both, my wife is back there standing, Melaine Barneveld, another immigrant from New Zealand, and we would have had Father Seamus do the service,
I
but
think I knew him.
but because,
Genovese.
yes, Genovese.
He's died since.
Yes.
I
And
knew him, yeah.
He was
Beautiful man, yeah.
magnificent. Don't talk about it, I'll cry.
Yeah.
Anyway, he came and witnessed as a private citizen. So what Donal is saying is there are ways around it. Unfortunately, not like Reform Judaism where you can have a ritual, right? Can you tell us about that?
Well, I devote a whole class to queering love rituals and commitment ceremonies and weddings and unions. And so students will hear a lot more about that later in the semester. But I think what we're doing is similar to what you just described, that we're taking and adapting our traditions and rituals to make them speak for us. Yeah.
So one of my favorite principles of Judaism is tikkun olam. I may not be saying it correctly, which basically means to repair the world. And I would like to ask the rabbi, what does that guiding principle mean to you?
Well, I have two Jewish quotes that I think of that guide me in terms of making sense of how to repair the world. One is a teaching from the 5th century that's attributed to Rabbi Tarfon in the Ethics of Our Ancestors, in Pirkei Avot. And the teaching is, you're not obliged to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. So I think in different words, we're all required to be engaged in the project, and if we're choosing to turn away then and protect ourselves, and then if we're overwhelmed and we become apathetic, then we become indifferent. And the other teaching is from Abraham Joshua Heschel, and he says the opposite of evil, the opposite of good isn't evil, it's indifference. So those two teachings go hand in hand. It is overwhelming to be a participant in the world, but we can't hide away. We're obliged to try and do our part while we're alive to make it better. Yeah, and I do feel like we're doing that every day here.
And Father Donal, what would you say is the Catholic equivalent to Tikkun Olam?
Maybe somebody can help me, but I'm not exactly sure there's an exact equivalent. But it's embedded in our teachings. It's not surprising, really, because Jesus was born and died Jewish, so he was informed by this principle. So it comes through in his teachings in many ways. But it also comes through in the social teachings of the church, which most Catholics don't know much about. They know what they often know, well, the certain topics are well known and others aren't. But the social teachings would surprise most people, and certainly J.D. Vance would be surprised if he ever read them, because he clearly hasn't ever heard of them in some of his statements in the last week. And they talk about this compassion and social justice and the need to engage, and of course the famous encyclical Laudato Si by Pope Francis, which was a radical new step in terms of including our common home, this earth in our love and care, and quite a shift in understanding from putting us at the center to it's quite a shift in Catholic teaching to seeing us in relation to to all living creatures and the planet. Yeah.
I hadn't heard of
Yeah,
that
yeah,
example,
yeah,
so that's
yeah,
a great
yeah.
example with respect to climate change. And even the Pope is writing an encyclical. Tell us what an encyclical does, or what does it
An
mean?
encyclical is a name for a letter. So it's a letter that the Pope writes. So within the Catholic Church's understanding of teaching, it has considerable authority in terms of setting down what we teach. So the Pope says things every day. They don't become part of the teaching of the Church. They're not infallible. They don't have any. But sometimes he takes time to write a special letter, and he took time to write this special letter on common home called Laudato Si, and it's a prophetic call. And often it's just addressed to Catholics, but in this occasion, he addressed it to all people of goodwill. And so, in fact, we had a conference here in the From, Interfaith Conference, soon after that came out, with people from different faith traditions who said they were inspired by him to do the same kind of thing within each of their own traditions. And the scientists who were there said, we're very grateful because we keep saying the science, but nobody's listening to us. Maybe spiritual transformation is also needed before we begin to take climate change and this issue seriously. And it's as much a spiritual issue as it is, the scientists have been telling us, and we've just not been listening to them. I mean, some of us have, but many haven't. Obviously, the recent elections, it was really not an issue. It was hardly an issue that was mentioned by either side. I mean, occasionally, but it was mostly not even something that people were talking about. And that scared me, and it has serious consequences. Yeah,
It's alarming.
it's alarming. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. What did you learn from becoming involved even as an observer and writing your dissertation, which became the basis of this book, Gaze and Graze, at Most Holy Redeemer during the height of the AIDS crisis?
Well, it was a difficult space to walk into. It was the middle of the AIDS crisis when I arrived here from Ireland. I was the deacon in that parish for a year. It was the best, Dickens says, the best of times, the worst of times. There was enormous suffering, but it brought people together in solidarity and love across the title is Gays and Grace. So it was mostly younger gay men coming into the parish. They were dying weekly of AIDS, young people in the city.
What year was that, Father? I forget.
In the
81,
90s.
82, 83,
Yeah.
84, 85, 86,
Yeah.
87, 88.
So there was a
89.
desperation. There was this, and it was hard. I got to know people who then died, young men who were, I was a bit older than them, and they were, but the oldest, and they bonded with the older women in the parish. There was a kind of a bond that came, and they wanted, and they came, unlikely as it was, they became a new kind of thing in the Castro. And it wasn't us and them anymore. It was we're together.
Yes.
We're different. We respect.
Yeah.
We can be different. We're not, but we become friends. We become friends, and
I
then
was in that.
it transforms a society. And also, it became the place. Of course, the Catholic Church was anathema to many of the people coming here because they'd had harsh or bad experiences. But in this one community, there was a place where you could encounter the church and be welcomed and received and celebrated. So people trusted that would come and have their funerals in the church because even if they hadn't gone to the church, because they knew they would be welcome and we would celebrate. And not the saddest funeral I went to when I first came here was a man whom I anointed on his deathbed, a young man dying of AIDS. And then I knew him a little bit. He was closer friends with another Jesuit, but I went to his funeral. I sat at the back with all his queer friends because the family was so embarrassed by that he died of AIDS and was a gay man. There was and some other Catholic priest whom I didn't know took over the service. I was not invited to be part of it. And it was as if I looked around at his friends at the back of the chapel in the mortuary and thought, I hope you're going to do something that truly honors him as he is, because the family couldn't cope with it. But more often in this parish, everybody was there and they welcomed each other, and they would have a wine reception after the funeral, and people would be crying, and the family would fly in maybe from some other part of the country. Some of them had rejected their children, but some didn't. And then they came, and they were able to come to a place where they could understand, but also encounter the queer community through a community that they could somehow feel comfortable in, because it was just too much for them to jump from small town into what the Castro was at the time. As beautiful it was, but it's too much for many people. So this was a place where you could kind of come and be part of it, but then you still had the comfort of what you was familiar with. And anyway, yeah, that's enough.
Well, Dr. Cecilia
yeah.
Wambach was a member of Most Holy Redeemer.
Yeah, and my son was 5, and I used to bring him, and so I saw that.
You saw the transformation.
I saw what started to happen at Most Holy Redeemer.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
It's a parable of what can happen, and it seems with this country we're so divided now. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
They were vastly
They were very
divided.
divided. They called the people coming in the invaders, and it was the parish was the center of the
Right.
hostility to the newcomers. Now there was circumstances and so on, and a good leader who said, "I don't want you hating each other. I'm going to bring you together." Tony
I was in
McGuire.
the choir, actually.
Oh, the choir, and
I was there during that time.
And
Yeah,
said,
it was a
I'm not going to
wonderful,
let you be
wonderful
enemies. You're going to,
experience.
But they had the heart. I think the transformation
Yes.
came in the heart. When we're stuck in our heads and, like, I don't know how to talk to people who support what's going on right now. I don't know how to have a conversation with them. But I think it's something's taken over them, and it's here. How do they listen to people who are being deported, or trans people? I mean, on Sunday, a trans identified student came up to me at the student mass here and said, oh, that's nice to be here. And he said, I've never been in a Catholic service before, and I go to a Christian church in my home, but I was really nervous coming here because I'm trans. And and what's happened this week has just been horrifying in the country. But I feel safe and comfortable and welcomed here. Thank you, and that just made my heart warm. And I said, no, yeah, you know.
Yes.
Speaking of trans, Rabbi, what will be your response to the flurry of anti-transgender executive orders, legislation, and Supreme Court rulings in the United States?
Well, day to day, my response is teaching, being in the classroom. I still think that the classroom is actually the most transformative space in our society. And I'm very hopeful about banishing ignorance and empowering people with texts and arguments. And this week, we wrote a letter of gratitude to the bishop. We took time in our class to listen to her plea asking for mercy, and then we
Marion Budde.
And then we took time in our Breaking Bread in the Binary lunch to write and thank her. So my plan is to continue to stay educated. We can't stop listening to the news because it's so painful. That's what they would want, is for us not to pay attention as they take our rights away. So we have to figure out how to stay engaged with what's happening and learning about it, and peacefully and nonviolently defy wherever we can, and push back and use our spheres of influence to come out. Because again, I think in my experience, we can change people's hearts and minds when we're honest about who we are. That's sometimes the most we have, is our own lives, to challenge others with their bigotry and to say, like, I don't know where you're getting that. My aunt is, to speak as personally as we can, to interrupt.
The narrative.
Can I answer that too?
Yes.
Just, Admiral Rachel Levine, who's in your book, I didn't know about her, but she's trans, and she's an admiral. She resigned on the day of the inauguration, so she's no longer in that office. But she was a humble public servant who did a lot of good, and she was openly trans, but it wasn't. She just did her job. She was, and the executive order that was signed this week about trans people in the military, I just thought, what a slap in the face for this, more than a slap in the face, what an utter despicable thing to do for this wonderful human being who served our country so well. And the thing that really, there's a line has been crossed, because the last time they did, this time in the executive order, there's language that actually dehumanizes trans people and says that they're part of the reason why we can't have them is because they're sort of less than human, which is just mind-boggling. And we know where that takes us. We know what that kind of language and those kind of actions, where they go. We've been here before in other times in history, in the 1930s in Germany and in Italy under Mussolini. We know where it goes, and I'm not sure. I mean, we're all responding in our own way, and we have to stay healthy and mentally healthy. It's overwhelming. I'm overwhelmed at times, and I can't let that happen. So sometimes I'm rationing the news because it's just too much. But Professor Bill Hing is in our law school. He's a professor of immigration law. He's going to Catholic churches each Sunday. He's not Catholic, but he's offering clinics, and the people who go to Mass are coming to learn about their rights. I've got some little cards that they give out. You're welcome to have one, because we have rights, and non-citizens have rights, and they haven't been taken away yet, and we still have the right to exercise the Constitution. So I think despair would be, I understand how one might, but I'm not going to despair. I choose to live in hope, hope is not an easy virtue to live with right now, but I'm going to choose to live in hope. And that means being around people like you and people who are here, and with Professor Bill Hing and others who, he advises them, but he also says, as best you can, go about your lives as normal, because the chance is actually very small. They're generating a lot of fear. I can't deliver, and it's very unlikely if you're careful and don't get a DUI or don't get a speeding ticket, you probably won't be, targeted. And also with as much joy as you can, because the very thing they're seeking to do right now is to paralyze people and put them into a state of fear, and it's working to some extent. But so I want to go on living with as much joy as I can while living into the resistance at the same time, with the pain. The pain won't go away, but I'm going to lean into the pain with joy and hope.
On that note, I'd like to turn it over to you in the audience, and I'd also like to introduce Katina. If you would stand, Katina Johnson. Katina is in my writers group, but she's renowned for having started or helped to start the Google Authors group. What did you call it, Katina?
Yeah, that's right. We called the Google Authors.
Yes. So she's been seditious in her own way, and welcome to coming. So I'm opening it up to the floor. Are there any, do you have any questions, comments, concerns, whatever you feel like bringing up? This is a sanctuary.
And also feel free, you're all welcome to approach me outside this context too. Yeah.
And I'm sure Rabbi as well.
Yeah.
Any, yes.
One of the things we spoke about in our class on Tuesday was, or I tell you that I've been thinking about over the past 8 years or whatever, has been the rise in Christian nationalism, and how I would argue that that's sort of an oxymoron in and of itself. I'm wondering what your thoughts are as a Catholic priest, and then also your thoughts as a rabbi, as someone who's a religious leader but not a Christian religious leader, on how, on what that means and how to combat it.
During the elections, I preached on this at St. Agnes Church, which is a Jesuit parish down in Masonic, condemning Christian nationalism because it's not Christianity and it shouldn't have the title Christian in it. It's nationalism is not, and I think nationalism is the problem, whether it's Christian or Hindu nationalism in India or Buddhist nationalism in Myanmar or whatever. It's not those faith traditions. It's not a problem with those traditions. The problem is with the incarnation of what is called, so Hindu nationalism is a perversion of Hinduism. And what the Buddhist nationalism in Myanmar is a perversion of the Buddhist tradition also. And so is Christian nationalism in this country and in other places, but it seems especially strong in this country. And it's I don't know how, I don't know what, I mean, I was preaching to the choir, so I don't know how. I think Lance, from what he said, it seems to me that he has some version of Christian nationalism that he's serving. Yeah. So I hope he might listen to some people. I don't know. Yeah.
I spoke about this with Inez just before class a little bit. I think that here's what I want to say. Sexism and misogyny are really driving so much of what's going on, in my opinion. I think of homophobia and transphobia as weapons of sexism. And there are far more women who are suffering and will suffer under this approach, Project 2025, of Christian nationalism than gays, lesbians, trans people combined. So women unite, and people of all genders need to recognize that what we're looking at is the prospect of a kind of fundamentalist, fascist, something we can't imagine. I once had a student in like my second semester of teaching queering religion, who came from a Muslim family in Egypt. And this is a true story. On like the 13th week of the class, police officer showed up. My student wasn't there. They wanted to know where my student was. I was like, I cannot provide you with this information. Please leave my class. Do you have a warrant? No. Fast forward, turns out the family found out the kid was taking queering religion. They came over the weekend, they kidnapped him, and he was never seen again. How do I know this? About a year and a half later, I got an email from him that he was sorry he never got to finish the class. Could I share with him the readings from the 13th week on, because they were life-saving for him. And it's just an example of the kinds of, we have so much privilege and freedom right now, we have to use it.
If anybody wants one of these little cards afterwards, they're here. Yeah.
What's possible, I think that's, to be in proximity of the horrors of what is possible, what's happening right now. Anyway, I could go in that direction more, but I'm inspired by what you said, Donal.
So, Donal, tell us what are on those cards.
This is just what your rights are if somebody approaches. Now, the university has its own policies as well, but we're not allowing people to come in. But it tells you in Spanish on one side and in English, under constitutional rights under the Fifth Amendment. So it says, I do not wish to speak with you, answer your questions, or sign or hand you any documents based on my Fifth Amendment rights under the United States Constitution. This is for citizens and non-citizens too. I do not give you permission to enter my home based on my Fourth Amendment rights under the United States Constitution unless you have a warrant to enter, signed by a judge or magistrate with my name on it, that you slide under the door. Because ICE are now pretending that certain things are from the judge and they're not. So you need to be very, they're presenting things that are not actually legal to get people to open the door and so on. But so you have these rights. And then I do not give you permission to search any of my belongings based on my Fourth Amendment rights. I choose to exercise my constitutional rights. So it's on Spanish on one side. And it's simple, but I keep one in my, I became a citizen, but I keep one in my wallet now. Because, yesterday there were citizens who, because they were speaking Spanish, ended up in the detention center. They're out now, but they actually were dragged to a detention center in handcuffs because they were speaking Spanish. And now they're fine, they're out, but they were actually citizens of the country. And they were from Puerto Rico, which, so, yeah.
Jim.
As a tribute to what you are doing tonight, there was a ICE official in the news earlier in the day, a high-ranking guy, kind of supervising the raids, assaults and everything. And he said that because of the sanctuary cities, because of the red cars, because of giving people knowledge of what it is that they're doing, they're having a hell of it in the sanctuary cities, arresting, detaining, putting people out. Spread the word. It's very simple. I don't want to talk to you. It's over. And if we just did like you're doing.
The university is in a delicate position because if we don't want to get their attention to be on the radar. We don't want that. And we're destroying documents right now. The staff are going through documents and removing anything that refers to any of our students who are undocumented, so there's no records of that. I didn't think we'd ever have to do something like that, but that's happening right now. But it's quite complicated to do that because there's so many records and that is happening right now. And we've, that's these little signs on the doors that have gone up about do not enter. That's partly motivated by all of this because it lets them know that they can't just walk in. I don't particularly like them because it makes the place look unfriendly, but actually there's a reason why they have to be there right now. And if anybody comes, even if they say they have a warrant, we don't let them into a classroom or anywhere, and they have to, public safety will deal with it, and the university council. So there's but we don't want too much attention, because if then they're going to go off, you get, it will have consequences.
Well, one of the great preachers, he had preaching to chickens.
Yeah.
Was John Lewis.
Yeah. Oh, John Lewis was amazing. I heard him speak at our law school in our church one time, and I just thanked him for what he had done in our country. But as you can imagine, he gave a magnificent speech to the law students one year, some years. Well, he's deceased now, but
He had 3 rules: make good trouble, get in the way. Look back for it. Get in the way, make good trouble. If not you, who? If not now, when?
yeah, that's right. Thank you.
And
That's a good place to.
I think it's Rabbi Hillel has a wonderful saying, which is,
If I'm only for myself, who am I? If I'm not for myself, who will be? And if not now, when?
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to be here after this ends. I think you're going back to class. You have a question?
I just have a comment. Thank you for this beautiful evening, first of all. But I just think this is a very, very important book. And I'm very proud to be a part of it. And I know both of you are as well. My little granddaughter Fiona read this book last week, and she said to her mother, "I'm a lesbian." And she said, "It runs in the family because grandma's one." And she said, and my daughter-in-law was saying, "This wouldn't have happened if we would have stayed in Chicago." And I said, "Well, yeah, maybe it would have." And she was very, very proud to have this book, and
Nice.
she went with me to take it to her school. But I'm just thrilled that there's a book like this. It's just so easy to read, and it's perfect for youth and other people. Not all adults like to read long stories, and this is just, it's wonderful. It's very pithy, and I love the people that you chose. I feel proud to be among them. And how did you, Kathleen, decide
Choose.
who you would put into your book?
Well, that was tough, actually. That it was tough to eliminate people. It was tough to choose people. We had a criteria. My co-author Eric, who's in New York and just texted me, have a good discussion tonight. He's a gay dad, and he wrote a book about becoming a gay father with he and his husband. And the criteria was primarily, was this person excellent in their field of endeavor, whether they were LGBTQ or not. And so, for example, Pete Buttigieg is an excellent Secretary, Department of Transportation, whether he's gay or not. So we picked LGBTQ folks, of course, but they had to have excellence within their field, not just as an activist in the LGBTQ community, in the queer community, but in their field of endeavor. For example, RuPaul, I didn't realize this, the publisher really pushed for this one. I wasn't so keen on RuPaul. But it turns out that RuPaul has won more Emmys than anybody else in television.
I didn't know that.
And he created a whole genre, the drag genre, and brought it into American homes, everyday people. So as I read more about him, I was glad that the publisher pushed to have him in. Daniela Vega was hay una mujer fantástica, fantastic woman, and she's transgender and one of the first to be nominated, her film, for an Academy Award. Of course, Bayard Rustin. If you go in the Castro on the sidewalk, there are plaques, and Bayard Rustin has a plaque because before there was the March on Washington, there was Bayard Rustin, a queer black man who was orchestrating this entire march that Martin Luther King was the front man for, if you will, but it was Bayard Rustin who really pushed for it. Oscar Wilde, the wonderful Oscar Wilde, when he came to this country, the customs agent said, "What do you have to declare?" And he said, "Only my wit." And I just love that. So there are many contemporary as well as historical LGBTQ queer heroes in this book, including our wonderful Rabbi Camille Angel. And this is, I'll close with one little story. The way I met Camille was really kind of weird and sad. It was during the pandemic, and a good friend of my wife's, in fact, the first person she met when she came to this country from New Zealand over 25 years ago, died, and died young. And was a secular Jew from New York. And Rabbi Camille, she wanted a rabbi, but she didn't want a rabbi, if you get my drift. So Rabbi Camille, what I mean is she was not religious, okay, and she was not a practicing Jew, but she was a secular Jew, and when she was dying, she wanted to hark back and have some kind of that comfort. And Rabbi Camille was her rabbi. And when our friend died, it was Rabbi Camille who held Shiva over 3 days over Zoom, which is not an easy thing to do. And each day it was a different layer of intimacy. So the first day it was the family, the second day it was the close friends, and the third day it was colleagues and neighbors and people on the wider circle. And the way that she brought in, and she didn't make it about herself. I have been to so many funerals and memorials where the officiant, it's all about him, and it's usually a him. It's all about him. And with Rabbi Camille, it was about the people there. And I was so engaged and comforted by that I wanted to be a part of it. And that's how I came to be an LGBTQ elder. So here are living examples that you don't have to be a hater, you don't have to be a factionalist, you don't have to be a nationalist to bring light into the world even when we're surrounded by darkness. And these two, Father Donal, Godfrey, and Rabbi Camille Angel, thank you, are wonderful examples. So I'll stay and sign some books if you like, answer questions.
I'd like, since my class is here, to conclude with a prayer, if that's okay.
Please.
It's something that's in the textbook that we're using this semester, and it's words by Rabbi Reuben Zellman, who is the first trans rabbi. He's been ordained now for almost a decade. And I'd like to ask Donal, if you'd read the second paragraph. Sure. As the sun sinks and the colors of the day turn, we offer a blessing for the twilight. For twilight is neither day nor night, but in between. We are all twilight people. We can never be fully labeled or defined. We are many identities and loves, many genders and none. We are in between roles at the intersection of histories, or between place and place. We are crisscrossed paths of memory and destination, streaks of light swirled together. We are neither day nor night. We are both, neither, and all.
May the sacred in-between of this evening suspend our certainties, soften our judgments, and widen our vision. May this in-between light illumine our way to the God who transcends all categories and definitions. May the in-between people who have come to pray be lifted up into this twilight. We cannot always define. We can always say a blessing. Blessed are you, God of all, who brings on the twilight.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank
you.